From 13 tiny colonies to one of the largest superpowers in history, this is the epic story of America in under 6 minutes. Let's go. On October 12, 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail west across the Atlantic Ocean. He wanted to find a faster route to Asia, but instead stumbled upon an archipelago that would change the course of world history. Technically, this was not the first time humans had reached the Americas. The Vikings had established a settlement in Newfoundland, Canada, around 500 years earlier. However, their colony only lasted around 10 years. When Columbus arrived, it was the indigenous peoples who had thriving civilizations and cultures all throughout the land that we now call the United States. When word got back to Europe that there was a new continent full of riches, just waiting to be exploited, the Spanish and the Portuguese began sending expeditions over to claim as much of it as they could for themselves. However, both of these countries were primarily interested in the south. The northern part of the continent quickly became a battleground between the Dutch, the French, and the British. And it was long before these three European powers had formed 13 colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America. The British would go on to conquer most of these colonies by the early 1700s, but despite being ruled by an absolute monarch more than 3,000 miles away, the American colonies were allowed to govern themselves thanks to the policy known as salutary neglect. This worked out well for everyone at first, but as the colonies grew and developed into a significant economic powerhouse for the British Empire, the British Parliament began to take a greater interest in how things were being run over in America. In the early 1700s, the British government began to pass laws that the colonists felt infringed on their rights as British citizens. As tensions rose, colonial leaders began meeting together at gatherings known as the Continental Congress. In 1774, the First Continental Congress met to discuss a unified response to the growing list of grievances against the Crown. When this failed to resolve anything, delegates met again the following year. In 1775, the American Revolutionary War began. The war would rage on for 8 long years, until finally, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. This treaty officially recognized the United States as a sovereign nation and granted it vast amounts of territory. With independence won, the newly formed United States began drafting a new form of government. Many of the founding fathers looked back to the ideas of Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau for inspiration. After much debate and discussion, the Articles of Confederation was adopted in 1777. This established the United States as a loose confederation of states with a weak central government. However, as the country began to grow and develop under this new form of government, it soon became apparent that the Articles of Confederation was not strong enough to keep the country united. A constitutional convention was called for in 1787 to draft a new governing document. All the delegates had to do was come up with a better plan than the Articles of Confederation. Well, they ended up creating what many historians consider to be the greatest governing document in world history, the United States Constitution. Established a federal republic with a strong central government that would ultimately serve as the model for dozens of other countries. The newly drafted Constitution went into effect in 1789, and the United States entered a period of relative peace and prosperity that would last for nearly 8 decades. During this time, the United States would double in size through a series of land acquisitions known as the Louisiana Purchase, the Oregon Territory, and the Mexican Cession. The country was also growing rapidly as waves of immigrants came from Europe seeking religious freedom or fleeing persecution. But the rapid growth of slavery in the southern states created an ever-widening gap between the industrialized North and the agrarian South. This issue would come to a head, and the nation would be thrown into its bloodiest conflict yet. On April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, thus beginning the American Civil War. For the next 4 years, the nation would be torn apart as brother fought against brother in a conflict over states' rights and slavery. As the war raged on, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all slaves in Confederate territory to be free. This reframed the war as one to preserve the Union and end slavery once and for all, and that is exactly what the Union did. By 1865, the Confederacy had been defeated, and the United States was truly a nation preserved. With slavery abolished, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed to guarantee equal protection under the law, regardless of race. After the Civil War, the United States entered another period of rapid growth and industrialization known as the Gilded Age. Cities grew rapidly, poverty increased, and the gap between the rich and poor became extreme. But all of this economic activity was laying the foundation for the United States to become the world's first true superpower. By the turn of the century, the United States had become a global economic power. It was producing more goods than any other country in the world. At the same time, it was becoming a major player on the world stage as it had done with the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War. However, 2 world wars would really solidify the United States as a superpower. During World War I, the United States initially tried to remain neutral, but after unrestricted German submarine warfare sank a passenger liner carrying Americans, the U.S. joined the conflict. American involvement helped turn the tide of the war, and ultimately the United States emerged from World War I as a major player on the world stage. However, the U.S. would have an even bigger impact during World War II. From the beginning of the war, the United States provided massive amounts of aid to the Allied powers. But after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. officially joined the fight. American participation in World War II has often been compared to that of the Soviet Union. Both nations provided the overwhelming amount of resources needed to defeat the Central Powers and the Axis powers, respectively. In fact, by the end of World War II, the United States had become the world's largest economic power. Despite emerging from the war as a superpower, the United States still grappled with issues of inequality. In the early 1950s, the country became embroiled in a conflict known as the Cold War. This was a period of geopolitical tension between the United States and its allies versus the Soviet Union and its allies. Although no shots were ever fired, the threat of nuclear war loomed over the entire world for nearly 5 decades. This, combined with the civil rights struggles of the 1950s and 60s, created a climate of social and political upheaval. The United States was becoming a much more diverse country as people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America made the journey over to the United States in search of better lives. Unfortunately, they often faced discrimination and outright racism. But the struggles of these minority groups, as well as the efforts of white Americans who sought equality for all, led to monumental legislative acts that advanced the cause of civil rights. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. the Board of Education that racial segregation in schools was unconstitutional. And throughout the 60s, the United States passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. These acts outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. They also outlawed discriminatory voting practices that had been used to keep African Americans from exercising their right to vote. These acts, along with many others, marked the United States as a leader in the fight for civil rights around the world. And today it continues to be a beacon of hope for those who are fighting for equality and justice. From 13 small colonies to a vast empire that stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from a fledgling nation fighting for its independence to a global superpower that shaped the outcome of 2 world wars, from a country wrestling with the sin of slavery to becoming a leader in the fight for civil rights, the epic story of America is one that continues to be written every single day. The story of America is your story. It's my story. It's our story. Right, class? That's everything I have for you today. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.